And good morning, everybody. Or I think it feels like good morning, even though I think it's better to say good afternoon in Berlin. Welcome to the second day of BCB and the second day of Park City University seminars for drinks entrepreneurs. I'm happy to introduce the fourth seminar of Scale and Speed, the secrets of the founder-led brands that are changing the industries. And I want to introduce the session leader today, which is Frank Lampen. Frank is one of the founders of Distill Ventures, which is the drinks accelerator, or the first drinks accelerator in the industry, founded by Diageo. Here you go, Frank.
Thanks, Harry. Thanks everyone for coming. So when we talk about changing the industry, we pulled some data to look at what's happening, because we think there's something pretty significant that is happening in the industry at the moment. So if you look at the top 100 super premium plus brands in Europe, so the first question is, what does it take to get into that top 100 in terms of sales? And back in 2007, 2,209 litre cases in Europe would get you into the top 100 super premium plus brands. If we look at 2017, 8,900, so nearly 9,000 litres would get you into that top 100. So it's become a lot harder to get into the top 100. That super premium plus segment is really growing. The really interesting thing then is, even though it's harder, the number of brands that are getting in that are founder-led brands, so not from the big companies, not sort of old family distilleries that have been there for hundreds of years. And if you look at how many founder-led brands there were in that top 100 in 2007, zero. There wasn't a single one. Every single brand in that list was either from an old family distillery or from one of the big majors or from an importer with multiple brands. If you look at 2017, there were 13 brands in that top 100 that were founder-led brands, including some of the brands here on the stage today. And in fact, the story's even better than that, because if you look into the numbers further, there are a couple of other brands like Monkey 47, which were founder-led brands but got acquired quite recently. So if you add in the recent acquisitions, you get up to 15 or 16 brands. So a huge transformation in 10 years in terms of the industry really opening up to founder-led brands, opening up to people from outside of the kind of big companies. And a lot of that change has been driven by people like the people on stage here today. So delighted to be joined by Elwyn Gladstone, founder of Malfy Gin, Guillermo Erickson, founder of Fortaleza Tequila, Stu Gregor, founder of Four Pillars Gin, and Pat Rigney, founder of Drumshambo Gunpowder Irish Gin. So we're going to ask each of the panelists just to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about their journey and their brand and how it's going at the moment. So Elwyn, would you like to start?
My name's Elwyn Gladstone, and that's my brand, Malfy Gin. I launched it in 2016. I was formerly the head of marketing for a company called Proximo, Cuervo, owned by Cuervo, the evil Cuervo. And before that, I worked for William Grant & Sons, where I was the head of innovation for William Grant & Sons. So with my business partner, who's Mark Teasdale, who I work with now, I've worked with him for the last 20 years, first at William Grant's and then at Proximo. At William Grant's, I was very lucky. We created, Mark and I, Hendrick's Gin, Sailor Jerry Rum, Reyka Vodka. So we did quite a nice string of successful brands at William Grant & Sons. That was a great experience to actually work in a medium-sized, pretty big family-owned distillery company and actually see a new brand that actually worked. So that gave me a lot of interesting experiences, a lot of learnings. I then went to Proximo, where we created another string of quite nice, successful brands. Kraken Rum was one of them, worked very well. And after 8 years of working on that stuff, I decided to do it myself. So we launched Malfy Gin in 2016. It's doing very well. I think we'll do about 90 to 100,000 9-liter cases this year, after the second or third year. So beautiful packaging, very simple proposition. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. But so far quite rewarding, and it seems to be on a good kind of trajectory. So there we go.
Thank you kindly. I'm Guillermo, and we make Fortaleza Tequila, and we're from the town of Tequila. There is a town called Tequila. We're right next to the evil empire. But we started this business about 13 years ago. We started our journey. My grandfather had passed away and left us a small distillery. We were in the business. We had owned the Sauza brand, but when I was about 20 years old, which was just a few years ago, he had sold. And we were out of the business then, and we had been out of the business until the year 2000 when I started repairing the distillery, and really didn't know what I was getting myself into, but I had a good business background, IT background, and Defense Department background. I actually had a secret clearance, and I did not send my emails out to a different server, so for those of you who know the history of that. And it was very clear, by the way, that you couldn't do that. So, but at any rate, we got the distillery operating in the year 2002 and tasted the tequila, and it was made the way it was made 150 years ago. And we said, wow, we got a winner. Now let's look for some money. Fortunately, we didn't find any money, and I had to fund it all out of my pocket, so it took a little time. And 2005, we brought our first bottles out. And in 2006, we brought the first bottles to the United States, learning all the way. We didn't have a background in the spirits industry. And so the big surprise for us was, I thought getting the distillery up and running was tough, but what was really, really tough was to find a damn distributor that would talk to us. We finally found a great distributor in California called Wine Warehouse, and after about I think it was almost 2 years, we finally got in with them, and they took off with us and have done a great job for us. And now we're in, my son is right here too, Billy. And how many countries are we in now? 22 countries now, and we're in how many states? 35 states in the United States. And we have a direct relationship because we use this great partner called Park Street right here, Mr. Harry. So they're a great partner. They do all the back office for us, and so we're able to have the direct relationship with the distributor, and that's key. If any of you are putting brands, you want that direct relationship with the distributor. So, but that's kind of our story there, and thank you.
It's a tough act to follow. Just the coolest voice in the whole of the distilling world. Hey, I'm Guillermo and I make fantastic tequila. He's a legend, and he honestly travels more around Australia. We share the same distributor in Australia, and I swear to God, he spends as much time travelling the most remote parts of Australia, going to the craziest bars that I wouldn't even go near. There's Guillermo standing at the bar, just pulling a couple of amazing tequilas going. My name is Stuart, Gregor. I'm one of the founders of a thing called Four Pillars Gin. We're in Healesville, in the Yarra Valley, just outside of Melbourne. Which is, why is that funny? Well, it's Melbourne. And we make gin, exclusively gin. We make a bunch of different gins, but Cameron McKenzie and I founded Four Pillars in 2013, so we made our first gin on the 3rd of December 2013, so we'll be 5 years old in a couple of months. Just to piss Billy off, we're in 23 countries around the world now. I don't even know if that's true. Probably 18, but you know what, 23 for today, but we're certainly not in 30 states of the US. We're in about 6 or 7 states of the US. And I guess for us, we're probably now the best known of the Australian craft gin movement. There's quite a bit going on in the spirits industry in Australia, particularly small craft distilleries, and Frank knows as much about that as anyone else because there's a few little distill ventures businesses down there going really well. I have a background in wine, as does Cameron. We worked together, made a little bit of wine together for about 15 odd years, since about the early 2000s, from 2002. And about 5 or 6 years ago, we decided to make gin because we drank a lot of gin to make pretty shit wine. So we thought, what if we flipped it and made some really good gin and drank some pretty crappy wine? So we've done that now, and it's working a treat, to be perfectly honest with you. That's still got the Fortaleza branding up there. I just thought we might go to the Four Pillars one. Oh, there we go. How about that? And look, for us, it's you know, I think Frank's going to ask a bunch of questions about later on, but for us, it's been an incredibly interesting and fun journey. The distribution challenge that Guillermo was talking about is profound. It is the hardest thing in this business. It's not building the distillery. It's not making the first gin. It's not doing the packaging. It's not doing any of those sorts of things that people, I think, are most concerned about. It's finding the right distribution partners and getting the product to market. That and probably getting people right. Because this industry, particularly when you're a founder-led brand, as you were talking about, Frank, it's the people who represent you in every market that are the most important. Because if you've got dickheads out in the market, then you're only going to attract like for like. And with the obvious exception of me, who is one of those, which is why they don't show me very often. I get to spend one day in Berlin and then they send me straight back home. And then they spend weeks in the market. So, look, we make a bit of gin, we make rare dry gin, we make Navy Strength, a thing called Bloody Shiraz gin. If you want to come and have a little taste, come and visit us today. But I will get the questions going, but I'll introduce this legend from Ireland first. You ready?
Good morning, everybody. Pat Rigney's my name. I'm the founder of the Shared Distillery. We're seriously off Main Street in the northwest of Ireland, so we're the first distillery in the province of Connacht in over 100 years. There's lots of new distilleries now, but we're the first. My background, I've been in the booze business pretty much all my life after I left college, and worked domestically in Ireland and internationally with Baileys. So I was part of the big evil empire at one stage, but I got free, and this is my fourth startup. So Baru Vodka, Clontarf Whiskey, which some of you may recall, was my first. We have a distribution company in Ireland called Alcassian, which is my second. We have a brand development company called Fastness Brands, which is my third, and this is our fourth. So we have 5 stills, 3 focused on single pot Irish whiskey, 1 still focused on Drumshambo Gunpowder Irish gin, and 1 focused on our Sausage Tree pure Irish vodka. We 28 working in the distillery. And 21 of those are off the live register, unemployed, and now employed. We started with 1 distiller from the United States because we had no distillation experience in Ireland when we started in 2014, and we trained everybody, and the brand is on sale today in about 26 countries, and we're very proud of what we've achieved. It's distilled with Oriental botanicals and gunpowder tea. It's everything, every precious drop of everything we do is distilled at the distillery. We do not do anything outside the distillery, and that we believe is very important to consumers. And I look at this as a triathlon. You build, you make, you sell, but you start with the selling and then you work back, and that's how we approach the project. Thank you.
As Harry said, I'm Frank Lampen, one of the founders of Distill Ventures, and we help brands who are starting up and scaling up. So before we get into the questions, a quick survey. How many people in this room are brand owners or who are thinking of starting a brand? Great, so pretty high proportion. So hopefully there'll be some insight and wisdom from the panel which might help you on your journey. So how we thought we'd approach this is, there's been a ton of these talks at BCB and other trade shows, you know, some of them put on by us in the past, and there's always been bits of advice that have been kind of doled out to entrepreneurs who are thinking of starting up. So what we thought we'd do is sort of take some of those bits of advice and test them really against the experience of the panel and sort of see whether they hold true or not. So we're going to start with the idea that you should focus on one core product. So Pat, do you want to start us off with this?
Yeah, I mean, one core product is a good idea, although having been down that route with Baru Vodka, where I always like to have a second horse in the race, not to be totally dependent on one product. But Drumshambo Gunpowder Irish Gin is very important to us. It's growing well, but we have a second product in our vodka, and we have whiskey coming out next year. So strategically, yes, maybe you should focus on one, but I think you need to be careful in the early days not to put all your eggs in one basket, and certainly have a second horse in the race.
Stu, what about you with this range here? How's that working for you?
It's interesting. So I've probably got a slightly different philosophy, but it's semi-aligned, if you like, in that we've decided we only want to make gin and gin alone. But what we very clearly and strategically wanted to do was make a wide variety of gins and gin flavours. For instance, the Bloody Shiraz gin with category 1, you know, sort of an Aussie version of a slow gin, I suppose. But I found it very difficult because, you know, I've also worked in the booze industry now for 20 years and did a lot of, funnily enough, also did some work for Diageo and Pernod Ricard over the years. I found it impossible to find a strong category leader that was cross-category, that, you know, maybe produced a vodka and a gin or a whiskey, and it just didn't make any sense to me. So I said, well, we're going to make gin. We will not just make one gin, a single SKU, because particularly in a market like ours, which is not necessarily a gin drinking market anyway, you know, and we have a big hospitality play, at our home base. You know, if someone comes in and goes, I don't like that gin, you need to be able to give them something else. Now, for us, it's not a whiskey; it's a different flavour profile of gin. So, I think you've got too much riding on one single product if you launch one single product. I noticed when Malfy launched, they were fantastic in their singular focus of one product, but quickly have sort of diversified with 2 or 3 different. So that's not for me to answer, but I think it's in the current market, maybe think of it as a category play rather than a product play.
Elwyn?
Yes, so I mean, you know, I would say if you look at the brands, the mega brands, Tito's, Patron, those kinds of brands, it's a very powerful proposition having a single brand that you work on, that all your salespeople wake up, or all your production people think about every day. All they wake up thinking about is Fortaleza or Malfy gin, a single brand. It can be extremely distracting having multiple brands. I agree with Stu that brands that go across categories, so whatever, you know, dog food gin, dog food vodka, dog food whiskey, it's a tough consumer proposition because, you know, what is it? Is it gin? Is it whiskey? Is it vodka? So I think that is very difficult, and I know a lot of people do it, and I know a lot of people have to do it, but I think for a consumer that's a tough one. But I definitely think, you know, I am of the opinion that doing one brand really, really well is much easier than doing multiples.
So let's stay with you, Elwyn. So there was a lot of talk from all of you about how many countries you're in now. But actually, a lot of people would preach the wisdom about, you know, you've got to conquer the home market first, don't expand too quickly. So what about this idea about you shouldn't go outside your home market for the first 3 years or so?
Yes, I think that idea is a very bad idea. We're in 50 countries. I wanted to save that for last to see what everyone else said. So we're in actually 50 countries, and we have developed a great strategy called spray and pray. And so far, it's worked very well. Our Danish distributors are there. We're one of the biggest gins in Denmark. Maybe the biggest super premium gin in Denmark. We're getting there anyway. So I absolutely disagree that you should not try and go outside your home market. Again, if you look at brands like Patron, I don't think they even sold Patron in Mexico. Guillermo, did they? No. Till quite recently, and they've done okay. So I think looking outside is a good idea, and I would highly recommend it.
Guillermo, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think certainly it's where your segment is. And if you look, for instance, in tequila, it's the majority of tequila sold outside of Mexico. So Patron, which was Paul Mitchell and Paul DeGioia, were working up in New York, I think, in Los Angeles a lot. So they developed in that market. So I think it depends where your segment is. If that segment you're chasing, you know, if you're chasing the Costco, the United States Costco buyer, then your segment's all over the United States, you know. But I really think you need to really look at your segment. So in our segment, the majority of tequila sales are in the United States. The majority are in 3 states: California, New York, and Texas. And so you have to look at where to play. And we started playing in the sandbox in California because it was just a lot easier. And we were limited on budget in terms of marketing. If you've got unlimited budget, you can try other things. But most of you will probably find that you have limited budget to go and attack certain markets. And you need that experience. Does your marketing materials work? Do your brochures work? You got to do tastings? And what does a consumer say back to you? And you're going to change all those things from the original idea that you had. You're going to be back on version B and version C. So just be prepared for all that and do a lot of testing.
And it depends what market you're from. If you're from the US, you can spend your entire time concentrating on your domestic market. If you are from literally the arse end of the world with a really small domestic market, if you don't get off your backside and go over and try to sell it somewhere else, you are going to be a really remarkably large fish in an incredibly small pond.
So let's move on to talk about price then, because a lot of people would say, I remember a presentation here at BCB, which we may or may not have been involved with, which was showing the volume available at different price tiers, and it was showing that actually the volume available really declines as you go up. So there was this idea of not being much volume and little sustainable profit above that 30 level, so £30, $30, €30 per bottle. Guillermo, what's your experience of this?
Well, when we got started out, we're truly a stone-crushed agave, and there was maybe a couple of guys that were doing this, but it was maybe a kind of a high-end product for them that wasn't really selling too much. And we got into it saying, okay, well, let's look at this. Our costs are a lot higher because it truly is working like in the 1850s. If you come see our distillery, you'll see why. So we priced out on retail at $49 on our Blanco. And we were told we're nuts at that point. Now, there are some tequilas that would sell at $100. You know, there's one with a cactus in the bottle would sell for $99. So there is sales up there. But we found that people would spend a little bit more for a quality product if the quality is what we say is authentic. I think people are much more savvy than they were in the before. And they can't be sold a bill of goods because everything is available on the website, and they check your distillery out. Are you using a diffuser, or are you using roller mills? So they look at all of that. And so we found there is a segment there, and I think we're right because the movie star priced his tequila $1 underneath us, and Diageo priced another brand just a couple dollars underneath us. So we found that people were repricing to be just underneath us. So it's an interesting thing. There is a segment there.
Pat, what's your experience of this?
Yeah, I think if you were asking this question 4, 5, 6 years ago, I'd say, yeah, there's very little volume under the, above the £30 or whatever. I think the game has changed. I think for brands that are true, that when you look under the bonnet, they're the real deal. They've got a very engaging proposition. There is volume. We're certainly experiencing significant volumes that surprise us every day. And that it's not terribly price sensitive. Yeah, there are barriers, there are ceilings, but I think the consumer is changing. The consumer is looking for deeper and more interesting experiences. They'll pay a premium. They're exploring, they're discovering. And that whole space, I think, I see a lot of growth in that space. But you need to be the real deal, and I think where you've got founders like this who are really behind their brands and have something really exciting and interesting to tell, as opposed to the big mega brands. That's I think there's great growth in it.
Elwyn, you've been involved in pricing in lots of projects, big companies and small companies. What was your approach with Malfy?
So we are below £30. We're about £28 in the UK. $28 in the US. So you definitely can, I can assure you, you can make money below 30. The one thing I'd say is don't start with how much it costs to make the product. I think that's where a lot of people go wrong. Start with what you think people will pay for it. It's not the consumer's fault that your bottle is very expensive or your whiskey's very expensive. Right? It's really up to the consumer whether they think your brand is worth it. And I think too many people go wrong by pricing it off of how much it costs to make. If it is a success, you will be able to get the cost of goods down no matter what it is. And I do agree. I think the ceiling is raising amazingly, especially in the US with some American whiskeys, which are both getting scale at a very high price. So. For sure, it's just different ball games for different price tiers.
And let's stay with you, Elwyn. So one of the other bits of wisdom was that you're going to have to sell every bottle yourself, and the best you'll hope to get out of your distributor is just basic box shipping.
Yes. So I think that depends which country you are in. I have to say, in the US, your distributor is a bad version of FedEx. That's probably the best thing I could say. In the rest of the world, as Stu was saying, if you get really good partners who really believe in the brand and who are vested in it, they are very much more than a basic box shipping company. But the US it's a tough ride no matter who you're with. You have to do a lot of the work. And that problem, as they consolidate more and more, which is happening at the moment, that problem is only going to become, greater and greater. And there don't mean to be depressing, but there doesn't seem to be a lot of light on the horizon for that one. I would say it's only going to get worse, which is why, before you consider going into the US, take it very, very, look at it very, very carefully. Spend a lot of time looking at the reality of how difficult it is.
But then outside of the US then, how have you built those effective relationships that, for instance, have taken you to number one in Denmark?
Just by being nice to everybody. No, I think you have to, look, when we started in 2016, nobody wanted a gin. Nobody was interested. There's thousands of gins. And, you find them, you try and, build relationships with them and make it exciting for them, make it very profitable for them. I think that's a thing that we have, really focused on, is allowing the distributors to make a lot of money. So they're very incentivized to do it as if they owned it. I think that's very important in any market, including the US. They have to make a lot of money.
Yeah. Stu, what's your perspective of working with distributors?
Well, we've talked a little bit about the US. I mean, let's talk about the UK at the moment. I mean, the UK has gone through a monumental seismic shift this year through its wholesale and distribution. Companies basically going broke, people not being able to pay their bills, people stopping. We hit a brick wall in the middle of this year when two of our biggest wholesale partners basically we were no longer able to supply them because there were serious financial problems. So one of the issues I think with everything, no matter what country you're in, is the financial viability. That's why I love what Elwyn just said there, the financial viability of this third-party distributor model anywhere it is. Either they've got to be as massive as your Empires or Southerns in the US, or the smaller ones can get you to a point, they can get you into the good bars and everything else, but can they scale up with you? It's a very difficult business model, and that doesn't matter whether you're in Singapore or Sydney or London, frankly. Look, you need to always, I think that you need to do 90% of the work. It is a bit market specific about who, you may get a great distributor in one particular country. You may get one great rep within a particular distributor who can literally change the game. But do not ever believe that you're going to get 90% of the work done or even 10% of the work done by your distribution partner. You've got to do 90% of that stuff yourself because, frankly, there'll be a new kid come into the portfolio at some time. There'll be the Malfy of this world will come in and offer them $20 a case more than we can possibly offer them. And boom, out you go, bloody Malfy everywhere. We were going really well in Denmark till these pricks came along. Invisible now, seriously. For who? But you have to understand that. And so be prepared to do most of it yourself, but if you do strike it lucky with a great distribution partner, good on you. Treat them like love them to death, because they're a rare jewel.
Guillermo, have you built great relationships throughout the world with your distributor partners?
Well, I think both of these gentlemen have got good points, and I think you just got to realize that not all distributors are the same. They're not all cut from the same, and I think it's a pretty easy rule of thumb. One salesman, that if they have one salesman, they're going to handle 100 accounts. So you can do your numbers easily. If you go with a distributor that has one salesman, you might get 50% of those accounts. So do your surveys, research your distributors, and I think you obviously have to try and do activation on the outside, as Stu says, to do a lot of events and a lot of activations on the outside to get a move. But you also have to try and somehow get to those salespeople, and they have maybe 800 products, and you have to tell them why Malfy is different than Four Pillars, and especially in Denmark, But you need to get in front of those salesmen. Those are your salesmen, and if you don't train them on what's great, the great story about your product, they're never going to tell that story. So you got to get in front of those salespeople more than once a year. They'll let you usually do at least one GSM every year at each distributor. So just remember that. The more you can get in front of your salespeople there, because they're your salespeople, they're selling your product, and you got to get in front of them so they know your product.
For the benefit of people who don't know GSM, explain what that is and its significance.
General sales meeting. They usually do one general sales meeting in every distributor house on one Friday of every month, where you got like 15 minutes to tell your story. There's about 20 of you in a line to tell your story and do a tasting in front of their entire staff. But you have to do those GSMs. You have to be in front of those salespeople as much as possible. Otherwise, you can go do an activation and Stu will go in there to the Black Pearl, and then the salesperson will be in the sales meeting, and they'll get an order for 4 pillars, and they'll go, "What's that?" Because they won't know what it is, and they won't even know they carry it because they weren't paying attention in the GSM. So you got to get in front of those salespeople with your product. Don't be afraid of using the distributor, and don't be afraid of asking for those meetings and asking to get in front of the salespeople. Otherwise, they won't even take your orders because they won't even know they have it. We ran into that situation in multiple distributors. So,
Pat, did you want to come in there?
I think to get a great distributor, you need a great brand. So, I mean, you need to arrive with something that's not going to be a ball breaker in terms of selling it, that is going to pull. I think that's the first thing. So really get your brand right, and go to a market where you can actually demonstrate it has worked in at least 1 or 2 markets, and then you should be able to kick on. I think the other thing is I work with sales guys all the time. I treat it as adult Montessori. You've got to keep it super simple. So if you're going to present your brand, I mean, these guys have so much stuff that's been thrown at them. Some of the guys will be good. Some of the guys won't even listen to you. Keep it visual, keep it simple, keep it crisp, 3 or 4 points, and work with. Don't assume that you've transmitted the message that it's been received. I would say, if you do a sales meeting in the US, and we measured this back in my Bailey's days, I think the guys remembered about 10% of what you said. So you have to go back, you have to redo it, and it make 3 or 4 goes before they actually get it.
Great, so moving on. Next idea we're going to look at. You need a brand home. I recognise that. Shared up in Hillsville. So Stu, do you want to start?
It is very nice. I reckon that's the best. I reckon the best thing we've ever done is build a brand home. We're very lucky. We're less than an hour outside of a city of 5 million people. We're going to put 100,000 visitors through there this year, which is a pretty serious number. And each of them, we're in a position that's not available to everyone in each market. We're in a position where we can do tastings, we can do tours, and we can also run a cocktail bar there as well. So we're lucky in that respect. I know you can't do that in some places in the US and various other countries. Best thing we've ever done. Because we get a lot of tourists, a lot of travellers, a lot of people coming through. They get to experience. One of the things that we won't get into the nebulous concept of craft because that could keep us here all day. But I think one of the things about craft spirits, and one of the things that I think differentiates us from many others, is that we're always very happy to show off how we make our spirit. And there's very distinct, easy to see, 4 pillars, 4 big round portholes that show people where we make every single bit to your point, where we make every single bottle of 4 pillars is in that very shed there, and we have 4 beautiful stills. I think the home has been, and you know what? It's back to your point. It's where you can protect your margin. It's so good, the margin that you get, and Australia is so expensive. As those of you who have been to Australia know, it's like the most expensive place in the world to buy spirits. So if you can hold some of that margin, that's a profit centre for us. And I don't think we expected it 3 years ago. I really don't.
Pat, what's your experience? Brand home important for your brand?
But hopefully we're about to spend a lot of money on one. So we have a big investment over the next 12 months to develop a brand home, putting a greenhouse in to grow the botanicals and so on. So yeah, I think it is important. How important it is, I'll know more in 18, 24 months' time.
Elwyn, what's your experience with it?
Having worked for the evil empire, I can tell you more important than whether you have a home or whatever, however you want to do it, is to tell the truth, because you can really get yourself into knots by making stuff up too much. So if you make it with someone else, if you use GNS, if you buy the whatever from whoever, tell the truth about what you do. And people find it interesting. People find the story of how you make these things interesting. So, you can make pretty much anything interesting, but tell the truth, because if you don't, you are going to get into all sorts of problems. And at the Evil Empire, we experienced that a number of times, and it's very unpleasant. I think my other thing I would say is I think, brand homes are great. Just looking at some of the biggest brands recently of all time, Patron, Grey Goose, Tito's, they don't have homes, and they've done pretty well. So I think it's very nice, and it can be good, but just looking at the facts and figures, you do not need a brand home to make a success. I think it's very nice, but as I said, the most important thing for me is to tell the truth.
Great. So moving on, it's impossible for anyone but the big brands to make money in duty-free. They're some of the hardest customers to deal with. They drive really hard bargains. They want special editions. Is it possible for founder-led brands? Pat, do you want to start us on this?
God, I mean, listen, duty-free is a tough call because you're giving away a lot of margin off the bat. You're going to have to go in and promote the brand. Yes, you can make money, but you're going to have to put an upfront investment in. Thankfully, our brand is pulling well in travel retail. Where we are, we're the #1 SKU, believe it or not, in Irish airports. We're outselling Jameson and all the big brands, which is extraordinary. But we do invest a lot of money in it. We promote it. So yes, you can, but your brand has to, in travel retail, your brand has to perform. You're really naked out there, and you've got to support it. You've got to be very resourceful in how you promote the brand, or it'll cost you a fortune.
I found that fact out about Gunpowder because we share a GTR, we share a distributor in global travel retail. So I found that stat out in Cannes just last week. So yeah, you've got to spend a ton of money. Don't worry about that. Yes, well, you have to go to Cannes first of all. Yeah. Who didn't arrive by a super yacht? Oh, I did. Anyway, but you've got to spend a lot of money. Yes, you can do it. And it's one place where actually your home market is really, really crucial because we always, for us, it was so important that people were able to both leave Australia and return to Australia and take a bottle of Four Pillars either with them to take it overseas or to bring it back or to have one back home. We've also then taken a bit of a regional strategy around, so Singapore, Hong Kong, really key hubs for people travelling into and out of Australia. And now we're sort of expanding into the rest of the world. I mean, the United States is the worst travel. It's weird. It's the worst duty-free market in the world. So, we're just really looking at Europe and Dubai, and you can make a bit of money out of it. But what's interesting is once you become, the more successful you are in duty-free, the less margin you make. It's because they keep coming at you to invest more. They keep telling you must take that floor space. They keep telling you you've got to take more. So, actually, as you become more successful, you become less profitable. So it's literally the worst law of diminishing returns in business. But you've got to do it. Otherwise, all those overseas trips, it's much harder to claim back.
So let's talk about costs more generally. So the thought is that it's expensive to launch a spirits brand and even more expensive to grow a spirits brand. So Elwyn, you've done a few of these in big companies and now doing it independently. Do you think this is true? What do you think the cost is to kind of get something scaling?
Yes, it is very expensive, and as Stu said, you often get to a situation where the more you sell, the more you lose, which is very confusing. But is a reality, a horrible reality. So yes, it is expensive. It is expensive to do it. No matter how many spreadsheets you do, they will all be wrong. But it's still worth doing them. The biggest problem we face is not so much profitability as cash flow. When you're selling to overseas places, people are very slow to pay, and if the brand grows fast, it gets very crunchy on cash flow. So yes, you need a lot of money to do this.
Can you give us a figure?
I think I'll tell you, to get to where we've got to has cost about $5 million. But hopefully at the end you have something that's very valuable to someone, maybe one day, hopefully.
So Guillermo,
Well, how's that for a sales pitch, eh?
Guillermo, you said something interesting where you said, luckily you didn't manage to raise any money. Tell us a bit more about your journey and what it's cost you to get this far.
Well, that spreadsheet that I did that Eldon's talking about is was like 5 times wrong. At least to the 5th time it was wrong. So if we had gotten some investors from the beginning, they would own the company now, and I would have been fired because it took 5 years longer for everything. But I think if you have a brand home, it gets really expensive because as you grow, and especially in the aged spirits side, you have to get another barrel house. We're on our 3rd barrel house now. And we had to buy another piece of land to expand. And so it just keeps, the money you start making at some point, you end up investing to keep growing. And as Elwyn says here, the cash flow aspect is killer, especially if you have to age your spirits. And right now in the tequila business, we're in a raw material up about 1,000% up in costs. So you have these factors. So you have to look at your risk factors and make sure you can understand at the worst case that you're able to survive that, and make sure you include that in your plan. Do those spreadsheets. They probably will be wrong, but they help you understand the dynamics of the financial cost and where things can go wrong. So, and if you can avoid investors, avoid them, because if anything goes wrong, they'll own you, and then you'll be working for free. So,
Stu?
Yeah, interesting experience, because we've got 2 things. One is, don't try to do it on the cheap. There's a big craft distilling boom happening in Australia at the moment, and one of the things that I just cannot fathom is this sense of pride that we're doing it on the bones of our arse. That doesn't impress a consumer. It impresses a local community, a little cottage community that maybe is 30, 40 miles wide, and that's pretty much it. I think if you just walk out there, have a look at what you're up against in the real world. Right? You may not be up against that if you're in South Gippsland trying to sell to 3 or 4 local pubs, but you do need money. We didn't have a lot of money as individuals, but we did. We took an interesting route, which was we went to mates, friends and staff and got them to invest. So we've ended up with about 25 investors, all with a tiny bit, but they were able to give us, to help us raise a bit over $1 million, which put us in a position where we knew we didn't have to scrimp in the first couple of years. And then hopefully the cash flow, and you're absolutely right, no one pays inside 120 days. Once you, some considerably more, but it's, for us, we needed those investments. You remortgaged your house, of course you did. Yeah, of course we tried to, good luck finding a bank who's going to lend you any money, by the way, to fund a distillery. I don't know what it's like in any other market, not like, you see these billboards in Australia, we support small business and everything else. 5 from 5 told us to piss off. So that's why we needed mates. And everyone from farmers to mates to bankers to lawyers to half a dozen of our staff are all in. And we quite like that. We spend a lot of our time and effort looking after our investors, making sure that they're really happy, they get a lot of free piss. And, we take them out to really boozy dinners and stuff. And they're pretty happy so far. But you're right. What happens when it goes to shit?
So we called this scale and speed because, as those figures show, we do think that there's something happening in terms of brands being built much faster than they were. And this runs counter to the idea that's been prevalent in the industry for a long time, that brand building in spirits is a 10-year journey. Stu, do you think this is changing? Do you think things are getting faster now?
Well, Malfy's just set a world speed record, haven't they, to get to 100,000 cases in 2 years. That is literally a phenomenal performance, and you should be so proud of that. Incredible. I think it's a 10-year go. What they've done in less than, in 2 and a bit years is quite incredible, and, a tribute to those guys. They're incredible business people and great distillers. But for us, if I look at today, we're 5 years old, and I would say, we have just literally scratched the surface outside of Australia. We were a little bit in Europe, and we're going a little bit okay in the US, but we're not even close to where we need to be to have the sort of scale and to probably get the attention, because, of the last question there.
So, Elwyn, do you think the speed is changing generally, or are you just a superhero?
So I was talking to Harry about this the other day, and we're talking about the worst, because we have good, depressing Anglo-German conversations. So we were talking about the worst thing is for brands that linger along and they're not quite sure, should they pack it in or should they keep on going? And I think that, that is a very tough call to make, because you can dwindle along and you can break even, and that's a very tough decision. And my view is that these brands either work quite quickly, or they don't work. But I'm a very impatient person. So, I'll take a contrarian view that I think, if they haven't worked quite quickly, you got to be very careful to keep on with them.
Guillermo, you've been going longer than most of these guys with a partly aged product and things. What's your view?
13 years now, and it took us, I think, about 8 to make break even. But it's a tough road for people to decide if you're going to stick with it or not, because it is a tough competitive road out there with so many brands out there. And I think you just got to be prepared. What are you planning to do? We could see the trajectory, and it was a matter of if we had more money, we could have gone faster. But I'm glad the opposite happened, and we don't have any investors. We're 100% owned, family owned. So I think that's a better outcome for us, and for the long term, it's a better outcome.
Great. So the final topic we want to look at, and then want to have some time for questions if we can from the audience. At some point, you're going to need to sell your business or join forces with one of the big players. Pat, should we start with you on this?
Not necessarily. And one of the great things that we have in our company at the moment is freedom. I don't have an investor looking over my shoulder, breathing down my neck. I'm not tied into one particular distributor. We're able to duck, we're able to dive, we're extremely resourceful. We're sharp, we're on the move all the time. We're like a terrier. So the way I would look at it is sometimes that can actually screw you up, and it could actually take away from the, I'm not saying you can't do it, but certainly at this stage for us, it's not essential to our growth, and something, maybe could accelerate in a number of markets, but I think you should be very careful that you don't dilute the essence of your brand.
Stu?
Yeah, I think you're bang on. I think it's about whether you can get that rare, sort of cultural fit and all those types of things that you hear. When you're sitting in boardrooms of larger companies that we've all done over the years, I think that's the question for me, is whether you can get that rare beast that has both the passion. No one will ever have this. Here's the issue. No one's ever going to have the passion of the founders of the business, right? No matter how you can spread the love as much as you possibly can. So look, it is fraught. It's interesting, and I think each circumstance is probably different. It's in many ways it might be more advantageous to a business like ours. It's in the bum end of the world, in that we would gain sort of distribution power in markets that are not ours. I think it's probably easier to stay independent if you're closer to the American market or some of the larger markets or even European markets where you can, you've got a really sizable local market that you can work with almost directly. But for us, it's one of those things. I don't know. You don't. I like you have had a few other businesses, and I've never ever gone into a business thinking about the exit. It may or may not, mind you, I haven't sold one yet either. I'm 3 for 3. Ask him, he knows more about that stuff than I do. But no, I haven't sold any of the businesses that I bought yet. So anyway, we've started.
Guillermo.
I think you have to look at your product, and I think if your product is easily copyable, when you get to 100,000 cases, everybody's got an interest on it. And there's a guy in Ibiza that's going to probably be looking at your bottle right now. I don't know if you know him, but he makes similar to Jägermeister. He makes like all these brands there that are very similar. So if you got a brand that's easily, for its attributes, copyable, you got to really think about it. But every year, the Evil Empire comes to visit me, and they ask me a couple of questions. Don't you need a partner? No. Don't you want to go to the beach and retire? No. I love this business. I love being here with everyone that I know, all the bartenders I know, all the people that own other brands are my friends, and this is the greatest goddamn business to be in, and it is just it's been a great ride. This is our 5th year here at the Berlin Bar Show, which is an awesome show just to get together with everybody and see everybody once a year. we're part of something that's special, and I can tell you, if you go work in any other industry, you won't find this shit. You might find it if you're in the Marines or something, but you won't find it anywhere else. So,
Elwyn?
I had that choice. It was either the Marines or make piss. And I reckon what you're right. I think the main thing is it's the best bloody job in the world. Like, it's almost ridiculous. It's hard to believe that you get paid as anything.
Elwyn?
So I think it's, you know, it's fraught with danger, partnering with a big company. Because once you have done that, you are married. It is not. It's not a date. It's a marriage. Whatever percentage it is, it's a marriage. B, because value. I know nobody would ever dream of selling their brand, but B, because the value that is created, the big company sees that the value creation is what they've done, not what you've done. So again, fraught with danger. So yeah, no. I mean, short story. I think it's full of danger, and you're better off trying to keep as much of the equity as you possibly can for as long as possible.
So final question, and then we'll open it up to the audience. I want each of you just to kind of share one thing that you wish you'd known when you started. When you look back at the journey, what have you learned that you wish you'd known at the start, which would have saved you a lot of heartache and pain? Elwyn?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think if you think about it too much, you'd never do it. So I can't. It's hard to answer that. If you knew of all the dangers, you would never do it. So don't think too much about that.
Guillermo?
I think if I looked at everything, I wish I had studied the distribution model more, because I could have made a much more effective decision quicker. So that's be my only regret, but we're doing fine now. We came up with a formula to do distributor surveys and figure out who the best distributor is. So,
Man, I want to see that. So can I see that survey, Billy? I need that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, distribution. Nothing more or less complicated than that. Like, I wish I had known more about how to sell spirits around the world. Thankfully, we picked a great partner in Australia from the get-go. That was hugely advantageous to us. Like, God knows what might have happened if I hadn't done that. And that was pretty much a fluke. So, yeah, the point you said is if you're not a founder or business startup person if all you're doing is concerning yourself with risks. Because you're not going to do it. It's illogical. There was not a person out there sitting in a bar anywhere in the world going, fuck this, you know, the only thing missing here is an Aussie gin. There's no study or anything that said, oh, there's this latent demand for an Australian gin made by 3 bald blokes in a random town outside of Melbourne. You simply would not do it if you spent the whole time thinking about all the likelihood.
Pat?
My only regret is not doing it earlier, and
You're too old.
you know, because I'm having a ball. It's been the best experience of my life, and I think what's key is something I mentioned earlier is I'm not encumbered with pain in the ass shareholders. I'm totally free to do what I love doing, and I just wish I'd done it a few years earlier. But we've done it, so on we go.
Great. So I want to open it up to questions. So if you've got a question, please put your hand up. Stuart has very kindly bought some 4 Pillars swag, so there will be T-shirts and bags handed out as prizes for good questions. So start with you, sir.
Angus from Sorghum Gin. As a company that launched gin in summer 2016, I think we're still relatively small, just predominantly in the UK. So we're 5,500 9-litre cases last year, I call our first full year. We've got a brand home, great brand home. If someone were to give us, theoretically we had £1 million to spend, what would be the things you would next spend it on? If you've got a brand home, you've got the packaging sorted, and you're just looking to branch out further, where would you?
People. I actually got asked that question the other day, like literally, like if we were to be given an investment of $5 or $10 million, what would you spend it on? People in every market. Great people, whether they are brand ambassadors, trade relations managers, trade managers, sales guys, whatever they are, girls, whatever they are. Great people in market, because I'm beginning to feel that that's the key to the distribution play, is that there's always someone hanging out with the sales guys who actually works directly for us. So give me £1 million, I'd probably get 10 people, and I'd put them in your 10 most important markets, and away I'd go.
More questions?
Perfect answer.
Oh, well, Pat, do you want to give your, what would you spend £1 million on?
No, what I'd probably do is take the million, I'd freeze 850,000, put it into a separate account, I'd start activations with people or whatever, and just be very, very careful how you spend that dough.
I'd be very careful with that also. I'd probably put 855 in, freeze it. Freeze it, put it in gold. I'd be very careful with the ambassadors. A lot of people have lost money with ambassadors. We've seen them come and go. We see a lot of people put a big ambassador rollout and then they fail. So I'd be very careful. I would get some experience with ambassadors first, especially managing them and tasking them and getting their reporting before you jump in with ambassadors, because they can really cost. And they can really be useless if they're not trained properly and they're not supervised properly.
Yeah. Managing brand ambassadors is a nightmare, but I'd still do it.
Unless they're selling. Yes. Don't hire anyone unless they're selling.
Great point.
Time for one more question. Have we got another question at the back? Sir.
You guys got view on Costco and other large multiple discount retailers? It's your question.
What?
Costco.
The view on Costco and other large retailers who will discount.
I mean, they're very powerful. You know, it's, you know, people go to Costco to discover new things. There are brands that have done very well at Costco. You will not make any money, but you don't make any money in duty free. So I would look at it like duty free. That's kind of my view.
If you're in the U.S., you can make good money because the price control on the 3-tier, but for instance, our product doesn't fit in Costco. So and we did go in Costco and we pissed off all of our liquor stores who hand sold to build the market. So depending on your product, Costco could be a fit, but it may not be a fit depending on what you're asking your liquor store bottle shops to do for you.
Yeah, I mean, we went into Costco in Australia and I pulled it straight out. We've got some big box movers in Australia, big liquor retailers like Dan Murphy's, those types of things. Costco's not for us in the US. We're at a price point that's a bit too high for them in the US. So I don't have much experience in the US, but certainly in Australia, we accidentally went in and we withdrew very, very quickly. But we do a lot of business with big box retailers in Australia. But again, small market.
Yeah, we had opportunity to get into the discounters as well, Aldi and Lidl, and we've said no, just stay. That's our view anyway for now.
Great, well, we are out of time, so huge thanks to Harry, Sarah and Crystal from Park Street for putting on this day of talks, and of course huge thanks to the panellists for the incredible insight they shared today.